welcome. We're always glad to have this class here because everybody seems to like this subject. So, did everybody get a ticket for the drawings today? So make sure you got that. Make sure you signed in. And then also, at the end of it, we have a survey to rate the class and stuff. And then tell us on the bottom if there's a certain subject that you want us to bring in. That's what this is for. So if we get enough of it, then we'll try to get people to teach that subject, okay? Did everybody grab one of these cards? On the back side is our events. So if it doesn't have a date to it, watch our Facebook page on Campbell County Master Gardeners. We post everything on there. And if it doesn't have a date, we'll announce the date as we get closer to get it put together. And then also location. Usually you're either going to be here or at the library in the Wyoming room in there. So watch on that to see which location we're at. But we thought this was kind of a neat idea, so we're trying to plan a whole year that you can kind of see the subjects there. Okay. The Master Tree Sale is coming up, Master Gardener Tree Sale. He is going to touch a little bit at the end, a little bit about some of the trees we're getting in, if you have questions on that stuff here. So, Mandy can take checks today if you want to fill this out, or cash. If you have the exact cash today, she can take your tree forms in today, or bring them in by next week, anytime next week. The extension office, if you don't know, is downstairs. When you come in, just around this corner, it's in the basement here, okay? Anything else I need to... The bathrooms are out there. If you have to go to the bathroom, just head there. If you have questions, ask. We actually have 3 people going to do little talks today. So first one, I would introduce Mandy too. She's not going to talk, but she's our leader. So if you want to know anything about the Master Gardener classes or anything, she's our gal, or any of the plant. If you need to do a yard look or whatever, she's our main person. So contact her. There's Master Gardeners in here. Raise your hand if you're a Master Gardener. So if you have questions on anything, most of us try to wear our name badges if we remember them. Ask us if you have questions and stuff. Looks like I'm probably the only one. So. Oh, and Mandy, of course, our leader. Oh, Joey's putting hers on
the one
now.
Time.
But the Master Gardeners, it's a great class. It's a great group of people, so if you want more information, grab one of us or talk to Mandy. I'm going to introduce Wendy first. She's going to tell you what she is because I already forgot what she is. She's going to talk a little bit, so come on up, Wendy. And then we're going to have Chris, who's sitting next to her. He's going to talk after Scott, the main speaker, about Plant Select. And then Scott, our famous Scott, from Fort Collins is going to be doing the main talk and stuff. So make sure if you have questions, ask. So go for it, Wendy.
So I really didn't plan on speaking today, and I don't have a lot to offer. I've worked with Master Gardeners, been the city arborist for, I think, like 7 years, been with the forestry division for almost 13. And so I recently took a position too with the ISA, Rocky Mountain chapter. I'm the Wyoming director for that now.
Say what ISA is.
ISA is the International Society of Arboriculture. They're responsible for credentialing and saying, actually your training and credentialing you to become an arborist in the various ways to different offerings of that, whether you're a lift specialist, electrical hazards, tree worker, climber safety, those sorts of things. So I have some information on arboriculture and the different things for you as homeowners that you might want to keep in mind as you are planting trees, taking care of trees, doing that in your own property. With the City of Gillette, I am available to come out and take a look at your trees, help you identify problems, and put you in touch with some people who can help you take care of that here in town. The other thing I really would just say is I feel so honored to be here today. I'm kind of a Scott Skogerboe groupie. He doesn't really know it, but and I've done a lot of work with Ross Wrigley too over the years. Actually ordered trees. Many of the trees you see here in Gillette, they've either been propagated by Mr. Skogerboe or sold to us by Mr. Shrigley. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over. yes, these flyers are all part of just different information, insects, diseases, how to take care of mature trees, how to, pruning young ones, where to plant them, how to properly water, do all of that sort of stuff, and the benefits of trees. I will say this, did you know we have a carbon capture facility around here? Like, out north? Yeah. Did you know that the city of Gillette has nearly 9,000 carbon capture facilities? Every tree you see out there, and you guys, that doesn't even count like all of the trees you have on your property. All of the trees that are out in our parks, our right-of-ways, they are a carbon capture facility completely, from their leaves and their needles to their bark to their heartwood to their roots. All of that is very important to just life as we live it. So go plant some carbon capture facilities.
What's your number at the city?
Wendy?
What's your number at the city?
You can reach me at 686-5320. Email wendyc@gillettewi.gov.
All right, here's our main speaker. Whoops, one way. That way? Is that too dark? Is that
No,
all right for you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see him okay?
okay. Well, thanks so much for inviting me back here. Well, it's always an honor to come back to Wyoming. I always wondered, they always ask me back because my roots come from Wyoming. I think maybe it helps, doesn't it? My second great grandfather came to Crook County in 1876, 2 years after Custer. And my dad, and so for 4 generations we lived here. And then my dad became a professor, couldn't get a job at Laramie, so he ended up at CSU. So that's why that broke the chain. But it helped me because that's where the horticulture school was, and so I got a degree in landscape plants with the nursery management concentration. And in 1992, I first worked at Fort Collins Wholesale Nursery, and while I was going to college, and then got a full-time job there in '96. So I've been there, 3 years short of 30 years straight, and I've been the plant propagator ever since. And so I've learned a lot over the years, and the things that I'm talking about is like secrets revealed. So there is a group kind of, similar to Master Gardeners and the ISA, the Association of, what does the ISA stand for again? Of arboriculture. Well, the International Plant, the International Plant Propagators, the only rule that they have is that you keep no secrets.
Oh, really?
They don't, because there's so many secrets out there that people think, I better keep the secret because I'll be the only one that knows how to do it. And then he dies of old age, he gets hit by a truck or something, then that secret's forever lost. It's like how they built the pyramids. So, not that the things that I'm going to teach you there are, earth-shattering, is going to change your life, but it will keep you from making mistakes. When I was at CSU, Dr. Klett was my major professor, and he's a mentor of mine, and I didn't want to go to work for the nursery. I wanted to have my own nursery. I wanted me to be my boss. And he goes, Scott, I don't know, you're good, you're smart, you got all this enthusiasm, but you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And you're not the rich guy, You were a college student and you have nothing. I'm starting from nothing. It says, make your mistake on someone else's money. And boy, was that good advice, because I made so many mistakes. It's best to waste a millionaire's money than your own. So let's just get started, and I'll tell you more about Fort Collins Wholesale Nursery and then how I got started in plant propagation. Sorry, I'm blocking.
You're fine. I can see.
So this is just a fraction of Fort Collins Wholesale Nursery. The white plastic houses are cold frames. We have 180 of those. So that's just 1.5 blocks. And in between, each block is a growing block which grows in full sun, and the white plastic is there to keep the plants from root killing temperatures. Now, here's the first secret revealed, is that it's not so much about plant propagation, it's that the roots aren't as hardy as the tops. Did anybody know that? I didn't know that until I went to horticulture school. Why? Everybody should know this if you're growing in cold climates, because the tops grow above ground, and you get this Arctic fronts coming down from the Yukon, from the Arctic freezes, and it can be 30, 40 degrees below zero. But the roots are in the ground. They're insulated, and they're actually getting heated by the Earth's molten core, because heat rises, so it comes out and prevents the roots from getting to 30 below zero. And so they've done studies that if you put a soil thermometer in the soil and it might be 30 below zero outside, the temperature probe will reveal that it rarely gets to 10 above zero. Still frozen, but there's a lot more heat between the two. And so that's why we overwinter our plants in white plastic houses. And so during the nice days in, Wyoming and Colorado, we have, it can be cold outside, but the sun is heating everything up. And so if you have a plant in containers, you should protect the roots from root killing temperatures. As a rule of thumb, it's 10. There are some species that can take more than 10, like blue spruce, for instance, can take below zero temperatures really easy. So you don't need to necessarily protect those. But if you don't have a nice cold frame like this, you can put all your plants pot to pot, make a perimeter of hay bales or bags of leaves, and then fill the inside of the perimeter with leaves or mulch. And that's usually enough to keep them alive. And so that's very important to know, especially if you're going to think, I'd like to have a nursery someday, or I'd like to utilize my Master Gardener's knowledge and have a seasonal business where I grow plants for people. And if you overwinter any, there's your first one. So in the summertime, this is the view of the nursery where we've taken all the plastic off our cold frames. And that's because the cold frames are equivalent to 50% shade. It's like it's Oregon, or England, cloudy all day long. So you don't want to do that during the growing season. And if you had clear plastic during the winter time, that clear plastic will make them too hot. So unless you have some sort of ventilation to cool it off, like fans and louvers. So we have 80 acres here. You can see in the bottom right, that's our field. And then you can see the gray, that's all gravel. And we have 30 blocks of plants. And we're on just to the north edge of Fort Collins. And so we're down in the Poudre River drainage. So you think, we're like 5 minutes from Fort Collins from this picture. And the reason why it's all farmland is because it floods. So nobody can put houses there unless you were grandfathered in. So there's houses there, but if it does flood, their houses are going to be ruined. So when Gary Epstein, who was the owner of the nursery when I got hired, he hired me because he didn't have a propagation division, and he wanted to grow Rocky Mountain native plants, and he couldn't buy them. You could buy some. You could buy choke cherries. You could buy some Campbell oaks and some of the easier ones that had a greater range of adaptability. But there were a few small-time growers who did it, but they couldn't do enough because our business is huge, and we sell to 5 different states, and we got Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, New Mexico, and South Dakota, a little bit into Rapid City. And so he hired me, and I was just a couple years out of college. And so I tried to find recipes. You know, just like cookbook, you know, when you're trying to propagate a plant, you follow a recipe. And that's what we call it. We call them recipes. And they didn't really exist. They were hard to find. And it's the old adage, if you want to do something right, you do it yourself. Well, nobody had done it before. And the people who had weren't following the adage of telling everybody. They're trying to keep it because they're afraid that their business would be stolen by someone bigger, like with the deeper pockets like our nursery. So I just started looking around for you know, talking to as many people as I could, and the other thing that was the big problem was that you couldn't buy the seed. You had to go and get it yourself. So we started going exploring, looking for great places to collect the seed. This is one of them. It's this beautiful canyon in southeastern Colorado that's filled with all different kinds of oaks and cottonwoods. You can see the yellows, the cottonwoods, almost all the rest of those are oaks. And so that was, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, but this was the plant that opened my eyes. This is the plant that Gary told me, Scott, I want to grow the thimbleberry. It's a raspberry called Rubus deliciosa. And so it's a raspberry that doesn't have thorns, and it grows in the mountains and in really super dry places. And so I collected some seed up the Poudre Canyon west of Fort Collins and said, well, I've got to give it some cold periods because it's called stratification. Because plants that are from cold climates, if they didn't have this dormancy period that needed to be beaten by a period of cold, the seed would just fall on the ground, it would germinate, and then winter would come and kill these baby little seeds that just didn't have any chance to survive in the winter. They hadn't hardened, they hadn't lignified, they hadn't become woody, anything. So that's what stratification was. So I soaked the seed overnight in water, dumped the water out, put some vermiculite in a Ziploc bag and put it in the refrigerator. The next spring, I sowed the seed and not a single one germinated. Because there wasn't a recipe. I didn't know why it was. And then I was walking around the woods collecting seed, and I come to this. Oh, first, that's what the fruit looks like. So it looks like a raspberry, tastes like a raspberry, but the seed's a little bit harder than a regular raspberry, so it's not a perfect substitute. But it's a beautiful plant because if you look, those are 2-inch big flowers. Those are nice. And it grows in a dry, shady area. Can grow in full sun if you have it, if you give it extra water, and it's thornless, and it gets to be about 5-6 feet tall and is arching. It's beautiful plant, and that's what the fruits look like after the flowers bloom. But I was walking through the woods, and I came upon bear scat. I came upon bear scat, and I started thinking, what does bear scat? What can I learn from this? And I started thinking, well, your stomach is filled with acid, sulfuric acid, or some sort of, I don't know, it's stomach, hydrochloric, yeah, hydrochloric acid. And so it doesn't spend very long in a bear's stomach, but it spares enough. And it's 4th of July is when I collect my seed. So I thought, all right, so I need to give it some acid. And I'd heard that, I'd learned that in college, that you, some seeds have hard seed coats that need to be worn down before they will imbibe water, they'll drink in water so they can start the process. But it's winter time, or it's summertime, so it needs a period of warm first. So July, August, September, then maybe it starts getting cold. So October, November, December, January. So I said, all right, so I'm gonna give it acid, warm, and then cold. So I put it 20 minutes in concentrated hydrochloric acid. You know, I had to be really careful with it for 20 minutes. Drain, rinse all the water off, put it in a Ziploc bag for 60 days, and then put it in the refrigerator for the rest of the winter. And I took it out the following spring, and every seed germinated. So years later, I was reading this, and it was from Walden, from Henry David Thoreau, and it made me think. It says, I went to the woods because I wanted to live life deliberately, to front on the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach. And not, when I came to die, I discovered that I had not lived. So what can we learn from nature? And that became what I always looked at when I tried to find out why a plant, what it needed to overcome its dormancy and to grow for me. And that was the beginning of it. So the bear scat, everything grew well, and I'm pricking them out, and you can see the dibbling where I put finger holes in, and I would plant each seedling in there and get going. And now we do thousands of them a year just because we learned what nature had to teach. So it's not just that. Bear scat's my friend. Because they did all the collecting, and it seems to me that when, at least in our woods, you know, there's not that many things that ripen at the same time, so it's not like the bears running through a smorgasbord. Like when the thimbleberries ripe, that's what they eat. When the skunk bush sumac are ripe, that's what they're eating. So you get pure. And so that means I don't have to clean the pulp off, I just have to clean out the bear poop.
Or use it as fertilizer.
Yeah.
So
And
then if you save that and put that around your garden, that should keep out a lot of the deer and stuff, wouldn't it?
you know, they probably smell it and know that something's up. Yeah, for sure. You know, I just can't get my wife to help me collect it though. So speaking of my wife, there she is. She's also a professional horticulturist, and she works for the USDA. And so, but she works in a laboratory. And so whenever she gets a chance to go out into the field, she goes, I want to go. So we're down in Socorro, New Mexico, picking out this really interesting oak called the desert live oak, Quercus turbinella. And it used to be native to Colorado, but because all the white oaks have the ability to cross with every one of them, that they've hybridized themselves out of existence. They're really nearly out of existence, or almost gone. They've become a hybrid called the wavy leaf oak. But so when you want the pure ones, you have to go down where it's super dry, because they love it dry. And this is down west of Socorro, and it's really a neat oak. So she comes with me, we collect them. The big-tooth maple is another one that this is a native to Wyoming. And when you look at it, it looks like a sugar maple. looks like you've flown into Burlington, Vermont in the fall and you go and leaf peeping. You know, all the sugar maples that are all over turning the hillsides red. At one time, people thought that the big-tooth maple was a sugar maple, just a subspecies of it, but there's enough differences where it gave its own species. And this one was also one that was easy to germinate the seed, but they only grew 3 inches the first year, 6 inches the second year, 3 more inches the third year, and by the time you got the plant to be this big, it was like 7 years old, and it was in a 5-gallon pot, and you wanted to get $200 for it, wholesale. And so it just was there's no money in it. So my boss told me, Scott, try it. See what you can do and have you ever heard of mycorrhizae? Mycorrhizae is a fungus that 90% of plants on Earth utilize to help it bring back soil, water, and soil nutrients. It attaches itself to the roots of the plant, making acting as surrogate roots. So maybe 10 times the root zone, but they're not roots. They're pieces of fungus that venture out. And each strand of the fungus, 25 strands of fungus is the diameter of a human hair. So they can go into the smallest places where a root can't. They'd hit a clay particle and be stuck. They couldn't go inside there and pick up whatever cation exchange, whatever nutrients that might be in that clay particle, be it magnesium or calcium or nitrogen or phosphorus, all the cations that have a positive charge, because clay is negatively charged, and the mycelial strands of the mycorrhizae then capture it, bring it back and share it with the tree. Same with water. And in exchange, because fungus can't produce sugar, but trees can. So this is what we're talking about when you mention that they capture carbon. So the process of photosynthesis, plants can take CO2, which is the poison that's heating our globe right now, and bring it into the plant through the process and carve off one of the carbon and make a large sugar chain and release what's left of CO2 is just O2, oxygen. So oxygen comes out, carbon stays in, new parts of the tree start to grow, be them the leaves, the branches, the flowers, the fruit, they're all made out of sugars, carbon chains, and some of it's brought into the roots so the roots can grow, and the tree then sloughs off about 25% of it and shares it with the mycorrhizae. And the mycorrhizae use that, and not only do they use it, but then they make a compound that's called glomalin. Glomalin wasn't even discovered until 1995. We didn't even know what glomalin was until a USDA scientist found out that 25% of the world's soil is made from captured CO2 that the plants utilize. And it's not just trees, it's grass. So Wyoming, when you're driving through Wyoming and you just all see is just the grasslands around it, thank God for that grass, because it's capturing the CO2, and our earth would be even warmer than it is today if it wasn't for that. So what we're doing with being interested in plants and grasslands and preserving what we have already and adding to it, to beautify our yards or to grow fruit and vegetables for our families, we are helping immeasurably what in making this world a better place. And so I started adding mycorrhizae that I collected while I was in Utah, where there's a lot of big-tooth maples. There they call them the Wasatch maple because that's the mountain chain near Salt Lake City. and I found a bunch of duff, and I collected it and started putting it on my big tooth maples. That I was afraid to put them in the greenhouse. I was afraid to put them there because I thought, what else am I bringing? Am I bringing back pathogens too, you know, harmful microbes? So I just put them on the ones I planted outside. And I had one that was about 18 inches tall that was like 5 years old, but it had excellent red fall color like this one. And I dumped my duff that I collected in Utah, and I put rocks over the top just to see, so that the rocks would prevent the winds from blowing it away. That next year, that big tooth maple was 18 inches tall, grew up to be 7 feet tall in 1 year. That was when I became a believer in mycorrhizae. And so I found a company that had purified their strain, and they sold this called Mycorrhizal Applications out of Grants Pass, Oregon. And now when I put that on my big tooth maples, in 1 year they grow 18 inches tall. Not all of them, because just like people, there's small people and tall people. So there's some genetics involved in it. But before, I never got an 18-inch tall one before, ever, in the first year. Now I get them a lot. So it's another secret, is if we want just the big one, the 18 inches after 1 year, we plant double the seeds. So if a plant like this is a 1-year-old and it costs $2 wholesale, we grow double it, or maybe even triple it. So if we do triple the amount, then that one becomes $4.50. But it's worth it than having to wait 7 years to get something that's only going to be 2 feet tall. And so that's the secret, is to not, even though you've just made something that's $2 or into $6. $6 is still a pretty good price when you think about it, if you're getting the good ones. And so we do the same thing with big tooth maples. So provenance, this next picture is provenance, which means where it came from. So here's the ones up in Afton near the south of the Tetons on the Idaho border. They're growing down in this draw. So whenever it does rain, there's little bit more moisture. But down in Nogal County, New Mexico, those trees are 50 feet tall. When I first saw those, I said, oh, these are the ones I want. So I want something that's going to be this big. So I collected a bunch of seed, grew up a crop of them. But in the fall, in September, when it came time for fall color, they were green as can be. They were green into October, and they started falling fall color in November. Where the ones from Wyoming were red, and all of them were red and defoliated by Halloween. They were done. They were already, because they were used to our climate. So we stopped growing. That was one time. We don't get the ones from a place that doesn't match with your climatic conditions. So now we just grow the ones from Wyoming or from Salt Lake City, around in there, because it's similar. Much more similar climate. It's a really rare plant in Colorado. This is the only place that we've ever seen it. And if you look at that, there's one little grove. But now we know that it's a Colorado native, but there's way more of them in Wyoming than there are in Colorado. I don't know why. I don't know why they're not found in Colorado. Yes?
So the one mycorrhizae application that you use when you're starting these, is that all you need? Does that continue to grow with the tree, the mycorrhizae, or do you need to continue to find that correct variety? So
she asked excellent question. She asked if you put the mycorrhizae on when it's a young 1-year-old, does it stay with it? And it depends, but the answer is mostly yes. Because unless you say, oh my God, I've got these fungal diseases in my lawn, I better kill that, and you put a fungicide on it, So fungicide kills mycorrhizae because mycorrhizae is a fungus. So as long as you stay away from spraying fungicide on them, it should stay there. And so we put it on every plant we grow. There's only like the biggest class of plants in the world that doesn't use mycorrhizae are cabbage, the cabbage family. Mustards and broccoli and Brussels sprouts, they don't use it. Almost every other plant on earth uses mycorrhizae. They say that that's how plants were able to leave the ocean and make it up on land, was because of the mycorrhizal association that allowed them to survive on terrestrial land. So it's really a great thing to have, and I'm a firm believer in it. So that's what the Wyoming farm, that's about as big as they get, but it's bigger than a 2-story house. Great fall color, dry conditions.
How deep are those root systems going?
Well, normally they're not very deep at all, in the top 2 feet of soil. There are some tap roots that go down, they just kind of stabilize them, but plants need oxygen as much as they need moisture. And so if you go down too deep, there's not very much oxygen in there, so the roots die down there. So they stay in the top 2 feet of soil primarily. Yes, sir?
With the shallow root system, can it withstand our wind load here?
I think so. I think so, because they grow all throughout the West.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, and so if you planted a new one, you might want to do it until those roots start to go out into the native soil. And my mentor here was from here in Wyoming. His name is Gene Howard, and he was the last director of the USDA horticulture station in Cheyenne. And he used to call grass green death.
Yep, I still do.
Yeah. And so I took it to heart, and here's why he calls it that. Even though it's necessary for our cattle and the antelope and the deer and the elk to eat it, but when you plant a tree in it, if nature rains on it, what's going to get the moisture? It's the grass, because it's a fibrous root system, so it drinks it almost as soon as it falls. And so Gene would always point out to me, see that windbreak? See how piss poor those trees are doing? Now look below it. There's like grass growing up this high in it. And so then he'd show me a windbreak that had maybe dew-wet fabric on it, or well weeded, or had mulch on it. Look how much that's doing. And so it made a lot of sense. So especially if you got a new plant, I like to have big mulch rings around them, just to keep the grass away. And if you have it in your lawn, not only do you prevent lawnmower, it's like, what do they call it, lawnmowers impactus? You have a mulch ring and you don't have to smash into it, because you say, I think I can miss that, and you're like mowing, I just nicked my bark. And so by doing that, you save damage to your trunk as well. So this is another interesting one, the boulder birch. This is a paper birch type, the western river birch. And so we're talking about Providence here. And the birches, you say, what's Scott talking about birches for? They don't do so good here, because they like a lot of moisture. Well, this is why. If you look at the paper birch, the reason why it did so well is that it grows to the Arctic Circle. And then there's a few, in the North Woods and some in the Panhandle of Idaho and up in Montana. But then, look at there's the Black Hills. And there's a little dot west of Boulder. That's it. So we're talking Providence. So we went up and collected seed I've collected, last year Ross and I were plant exploring up in the Black Hills, and we collected some from there. And we've been growing the one from west of Boulder for a long time, and they do a lot better than the ones where, who knows where they came from? Who knows where the seed come from? Nobody knows. I bet you even ask the nurseryman, you'd have to then say, well, let me talk to the propagator, and the propagator goes, well, I don't know where the seed come. I bought it from this. Maybe we could call the seed company, but I didn't write down the lot of the seed, so nobody knows what they are most of the time. So that's why doing it yourself often. So if you wanted to try the paper birch, go up into the Black Hills just north of Sundance, and you'll find them. You'll find them. There's a lot of them. And you go there about October when the seed's ripe, just collect the catkins, put them in a Ziploc bag overnight with water, drain the water out, and put dry vermiculite, and all it takes is 30 days of cold in the refrigerator. So you would time it so that maybe do that in April. 30 days later is the end of March, and the seed put in a warm greenhouse or just outside with water and nutrients and heat, and it will grow. So other plants, like this is my wife again, she says, can I go? We're looking for dwarf rabbit brush. And looks like she's just right there in the middle of the grasslands. They're so small, the dwarf rabbit brush, that here's what they look like. They're like less than a foot tall, 2 feet wide. Sometimes if you under under nursery conditions, they can get bigger. But beautiful dryland plant that can take natural precipitation. You don't really have to water them very much. And you can get dwarf ones. They come in all different sizes. A lot of them throughout Wyoming, grow about 4 feet tall, some of them up to 6 feet tall. But the dwarf ones are really an interesting one. And those you don't need any stratification. You just wait till it's warm, sow the seed, and water them, and they just come up. But there's more to it than that, but that's just to get the seed to germinate. Did you know that there's native hazelnuts in the Rockies? Really? A lot of people don't even know it. You just have to find a waterway in the mountains, and you'll find them there. They're all over the place. People don't even know it. You just see green bushes till you look close and you see hazelnuts hanging in there. So there's all kinds of neat things that people can do, but can you buy those? Not really. Even I can't even find enough because the bears beat me to all the seed. And so I just kind of decided, well, I think the bears, they're having a tough time as it is getting food. So, and plus I don't want to become their food. And so I leave the hazelnuts for them. But if you're brave, and if you only take a few and leave the rest for the bears, that's the best way to do it. Other places like the Cheyenne Station is a great place to plant explore, because we are exploring what professional plant explorers did around the turn of the 20th century and brought back all these plants for people in the United States to enjoy and to utilize. And all the early horticulture stations that were around in the 19th century were full. So by 1929, when the Great Depression started, they put one in Cheyenne, they put one in Mandan, North Dakota, and they put one in Woodward, Oklahoma. So there was 3 of them in the Great Plains. And so the Cheyenne Station was abandoned in 1974. And it hasn't been watered until recently, into the recent history, when it was cleaved off from the USDA lease and started watering them again. So they went over 40 years without any additional moisture, just surviving on natural precipitation for all these plants from around the world. And so what did we learn there? We learned what can survive and what can't, because 80% of the plants at the Cheyenne Station died during that time period. Still, there's hundreds of plants there that survived on natural precipitation. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, they tested 5,000 different fruit trees. And in 1963, they made recommendations on which were the best. And some of them came from farmers that had planted a seed like, this is pretty good, you should try this one. And they said, all right, we'll try it. You know, so they planted it out, and 40 years later, you know, like they planted in 1931, 40 years, you know, and by the 60s, they said, boy, that farmer from Red Wing, Minnesota, really, he had a good one. Let's name it. Let's grow it and recommend it. And so then their work was done, and so they made the recommendations, and they bulldozed everything. They bulldozed 5,000 fruit trees. I couldn't believe it, but what Gene Howard, my mentor, I told you about previously, he said, wait a minute, come on, don't bulldoze them all, because we just made a recommendation. Some of them came from farmers. You can't buy them anywhere else. If someone wants it, they're going to have to get it from us, and they're going to have to start from scion wood. They're going to have to graft it themselves. So he kept it, and it was called the Goodhue apple. And I came on the scene in like 1993 and went up to the Cheyenne Station and went to find the Goodhue apple, and I found it. Oh, I'm sorry. There, I ruined my segue, darn it. That's what the orchard looked like. Wow. Then I went to look for the Goodhue apple and found it. There it is. It was top 10 in Cheyenne. They let the cows in, and you can see the kind of wattle behind. They were rubbing on the tree, you know, to the itchy fur, and it was, by this time it was dead. And then after that, now it's even more dead. But that just goes to show you that once you tame nature, you're responsible for it forever. Because if it was a grasslands, it's going to return to be a grasslands. But if it's an orchard, you're going to need your care. So when I first went there, it was in 1992. I told you that picture was taken in 1993. In 1992, it had one branch that still had a leaf on it. And I took it, and I grafted it, and there it is, in my yard. It's in my yard. And the reason why the Goodhue apple was named and selected was because it had averaged 100 pounds of fruit every year. It's just this mass. It's so massive. You can see all the branches are bending down from the weight of the fruit. Now it's a sour apple, but back in, you know, what the pioneers, they didn't care if it was, they didn't necessarily have to be an edible apple. It could have been sour, because that made, you could mix the sour apples with the sweet apples and make a really nice applesauce, or the sour apples with the sweet apples and make a hard cider, or just regular sweet cider that had a nice acid tinge to it. And so the Goodhue is like that. So it's not for eating out of hand. I once told a guy, oh, you should try the Goodhue, but I didn't tell him the rest of the story. And he complained about 4 years later. He goes, that's the worst apple I had. It's so sour. And I said, wait, didn't I tell you that it's not for fresh eating? He said, no, you didn't tell me. So if you want it for fresh eating, it's not that. But it was one that's recommended for other reasons. So here we're out of the propagation or the collecting part. So grafting and budding. Now this is an advanced technique, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with you on it, but it's something that you can learn how to graft in an hour. And so I have been asked in the past to teach grafting workshops, and I always go, okay, but you have to sponsor it and you have to use your insurance because people are going to cut their fingers. And so they say yes. And so usually I teach safety, and professional grafters graft towards their body. I don't teach that. I teach to graft away from your body, so it's not as easy, it's not as fast, but it's a lot better. So I'm just going to show you a few of the steps on how grafting is. You have to start with scion pieces. That's the pieces of the wood that you want to be the new tree. And so if these have varieties like Akane, golden russet, like Arkansas black looks like, and you take those during the dormant season, and this person uses just masking tape to mask so that you keep the varieties straight. Put them in Ziploc bags with a little bit of moist paper towel in it and store it in the refrigerator until spring comes. Then you take, when I say spring, you need the rootstock. So if it's an apple, it needs to be an apple rootstock. If it's a pear, it needs to be a pear rootstock. If it's a peach, it needs to be, it gets complicated there. Peaches are, remember, the cherry or plum. So peaches can go on plums, apricots, cherries, peaches. So with those, you can actually have a tree in the prunus family. We have an apricot on one branch, a peach on another branch, a nectarine on this branch, a cherry on this branch, a plum on that branch. It just goes on and on and on. I've seen those trees. They're kind of interesting. But prunus aren't necessarily, they're short-lived, so you go to a big effort to make, your 20-in-1 fruit cocktail tree, and then it died. So I recommend just sticking with apples. Apples is what you should learn how to do, because apples can live 100 years in Wyoming. So after you've got the rootstock has started to grow, the sap started to flow, but your scion pieces are still in the refrigerator, still sleeping. So you match up, you cut the cambium layer. The cambium layer is what is the part of the tree that is actively growing, and you make corresponding cut so that they're matched on both sides, from the scion piece to the rootstock. So here's what I'm talking about. This darker area around the very edge is the cambium layer, and it is on the rootstock. So you want to make it so that it's almost a perfect diameter from here to there to there to there, and it's flat as a plane. It's just like a tabletop. It's just cut equally. You put them together, and you put a rubber band around them so that the two areas unite perfectly. Then I use beeswax, or now I've gone to using latex paint. Something I buy. It's called Doc Farwell's grafting seal, and it smells just like latex paint, but it's really super thick. And I cover the cut ends so that when the sap does flow, it doesn't just flow out, because the beeswax or the paint prevents it. So it will go from the tree and not just drip out here, but it goes up, has nowhere to go, but into your scion piece. So it keeps it hydrated until it unites. Yes?
Can you spell the word that you're saying, scion?
Scion is S-C-I-O-N.
Okay, thank you.
So after you've done that, and you put them in the greenhouses, usually in the greenhouses, middle of April, and then they start to grow. But not just the buds that you want. The scion pieces here and the rootstocks here, the scion pieces here, every bud starts to grow. And you got to just choose one. You got to choose the one bud from your scion piece to grow. So that's called aftercare. There's aftercare. So all the buds that used to be down here are gone. And this scion piece has a bud here and a bud there. So let's look at this one. There it is. I cut that one off and just left the top one to go. All the branches that were down on the rootstock are gone. I've only there was a bud here on the scion piece, just the top one. All the goes. And that's just done probably in the first week in March or so. Or excuse me, May. And then by the end of the growing season, these are just 4x4 pots that are 6 inches deep. So they're not very big pots, but at the end of the growing season, look at that. They've already grown up. And they're just one single grafting of an apple. And so that's grafting. And once you learn how to do grafting, your mind just goes everywhere. You say, I remember my grandma's apple tree. I wonder if it's still there. So you drive there and it's still there, so you knock on their door, and you're doing this in February or early March when their apple tree's still sleeping. And 9 times out of 10, unless they're really grouchy, they'll let you do it. Especially if you tell them, this is my grandma's tree, and then it's help yourself. I've never been stopped. I've never been stopped. So, and then next thing you know, you made 10 of them, and you got Christmas done and like that. Here is Grandma's apple tree. You want Grandma's apple tree? And you can just go on and on and on. So now we're going to use oaks. Yes, sir.
Can I get back to your apple tree that you had in your yard?
Yeah.
How much of that do you prune back every year? What do you recommend for fruit trees for pruning back? 10%, 20%?
You know, I don't prune them back. I don't. I know professional orchardists do, and they do that just to let light penetrate into the tree. And so for a professional orchardist who's, depending on making payroll and paying for his house and his land and his tractor and his sorting equipment, they need to have as much, yield as possible. But for every pruning cut, there can be fire blight get into that hole. And, there's all kinds of things that could negatively impact every pruning you have. So when I prune, it's for shaping, and I do it if it's an inside, growing inside where it doesn't have any future because it's in the shade, I get rid of it. If it's a bad, crotch angle where snow can make it split, I get rid of one of them. So I do corrective pruning that way, but usually, I don't even care if they have worms. I just leave them alone because I'd rather eat into a worm than to eat into pesticide. Because you are what you eat, and that worm just ate the apples his whole life. Usually I don't eat the worms. I eat them around them. But when it comes time for pruning, I like to have my apple trees be a central leader. Sometimes people want them vase shaped, and so vase shapes are really good for commercial orchardists. And also branches that are more on 45 degrees or degree angles, or even closer to 90 degree angles, 65, 45, they have better fruit production. So if you have upright ones, branch spreading is important to get them to be more of a horizontal to the ground. That's what they produce more fruit spurs that way. So I have about 60 fruit trees in my yard, and I hardly do any pruning except for when they're young to get going on them. And my wife, you know, I'm a collector. I'm a horticultural nerd, and I want something nobody else has. I want the rare. I want to save trees that there's only one left in existence. My wife goes, you know, Scott, I wish you had planted delicious apples instead of rare apples. You know, have you ever thought, Scott, that they're rare for a reason? And so that's the big message I tell to you, is to get the varieties that you like, which have been recommended by your neighbors, which have been recommended by University of Wyoming or Colorado State University or the Cheyenne Station, and plant the good ones. Like if I was to plant an apple tree in Gillette, I'd plant Cortland and I'd plant Honeycrisp as the pollinator. Those are the two I think are the best, because you need to. Honeycrisp and Cortland. C-O-R-T-L-A-N-D. And Honeycrisp is from the University of Minnesota, and it's all over the grocery stores. But it's tough, and it grows well even in Laramie. So, you know, and that's 7,000 foot elevation, so it's a really tough. Are they on the list? Good. Yes, sir.
But pruning back like that, doesn't that affect the size of my fruit? Now, if I prune my pear trees that I have in my backyard, if I prune them back so much, I get a bigger pear than a whole bunch of small pears. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, sure. You know, that's the technique, and I think one of the reasons for that is because you've let more light into there. So another technique for that would be to just thin your pears too. And that's something that I have done before, and I don't like it, because I'm standing there and I'm pruning, and my fruit tree's got 500, because these are, you know, 25-year-old trees now, and I got 500 pears growing on my tree, and it's middle of June, and these things are only about the size of a quarter. And so I'm cutting them off, and then I have to let my arms kind of get the circulation back in the arm. And I just keep going, because I want to prune one so there's one every 6 inches. And that's when I get really big pears. That's when I get big apples or big plums. And so I've learned that since I have 60 fruit trees, some of them have crummy fruit because they're rare, that I have way more than I want anyway. And so the raccoons get a heck of a lot. The birds poke holes in a lot of them. The worms get so many of them that I still have enough for myself. You know, and if I was depending on it to fill my root cellar, then I'd be more concerned about making sure I did it right. If I was trying to be more self-reliant, I'd make sure I was doing it right. But I've got the grocery store, and I'm busy. I'm working my full-time. I'm not quite retired yet. I want to be retired. But I do that. So there's an old rhyme that I have kind of made one of the things I remember is like, one for pigeon, one for crow, one to rot, and one to grow. So I share it, because you know the pigeons and the crows and the beetles, they don't have King Soopers or Safeway, and so I'm leaving them for them. And
I'll ask you one, and then I'll leave you alone.
Yes.
Sir, are you recommending that I pick the fruit instead of pruning it? I mean, you know, like you said, you went every 6 inches or whatever you were saying. Are you recommending I do that instead of prune?
Well, you can do it both ways, but if you have a pear, pears are so susceptible to fire blight, and do you live here in Gillette? Mm-hmm. Does Gillette have a problem with fire blight? Yep. Yeah. You could be really opening up your tree for a bacterial disease that could maybe even kill it. And so every time you prune something, the sap kind of comes out, and then the bees find that sweet, and so they visit it. But bees also visit fire blight, because when an infected tree has fire blight, it oozes because the tree's trying to get rid of the fire blight bacterium, and they're still eating it, and they're covering their body with fire blight, and then they go find your new freshly pruned cut. It could come back to bite you. But, you know, that's by pruning in the wintertime so that it has a chance to dry back and not bleed so much, that can prevent that from happening, so you can still do it and get by. So I think both. I think both. You could do both.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Where do you get your apple rootstock from?
I grow them from seeds. So that doesn't help you. So there's a place called Collins Nursery in, I think, Trumansburg, New York. They sell rootstocks. There's a place called Raintree Nursery of Butts, Washington. They sell rootstocks. And look for Antonovka. Look for Antonovka, Antonvka, I think. And it's a Russian rootstock that's hardy to 50 below zero and makes a standard sized tree. Or you can just kind of do a Google search on that and see where you can buy them. And do it early in the year, because it tends to sell out, because there's a lot more demand than there is supply on rootstocks. That's why I start my own from seed, because I can buy a pound of Antonovka seed and grow thousands of them. But there's inherent risk of that too, because they can get powdery mildew and all kinds of apple diseases in my greenhouse even. So it's best just to try to buy them. So once they know the crop in the fall, just order them early so you get them before they sell out. Okay. So when I go collect oaks, this man here, Alan Taylor, was, when I was 30 and he was 60, he took me under his wings, because when he was 60, he thought, I want people to know where I find my oaks, because I don't know what's going to happen to me in the future. He lived to be 90. And now I'm 60 and he was 90, but he just passed away. So I wanted to put this slide in there to honor him, because he shared his secrets with me. So he took me to Cottonwood Canyon, showed me all the oaks down there. He brought me to this place called Arabella, New Mexico, near the Capitan Mountains, and showed me these Mexican blue oaks. Now, I don't think that this is one that would do well in Gillette, but it's got an interesting story, because when I went there, this is where Arabella is, and there's Roswell. And so when I went, and we know that the spaceship, supposed alleged spaceship, didn't crash in downtown Roswell, it crashed in the countryside. So I'm looking on my map. And here's Roswell, and there's where I was told to go look. And it's like 40 miles from Roswell. And there's Arabella, and there's the little town of Tinney. So I stop at Tinney to ask permission, because it's all white. It's all private grounds. I didn't want to just go without being permission. And the guy says, oh, you can't go there. My son owns that place. Nope, you can't go there. And I was thinking, oh man, I drove all the way down here for nothing? And so I'm thinking. Well, in the meantime, I'd noticed this weird thing. Alien head drawn onto the map. And I started thinking, what do map makers do? They talk amongst each other. And they must have said, where do you suppose did that spaceship crash? And somebody knew and put it down there. So I showed the old timer and Tinny this spaceship, and I said, is this where the spaceship crashed? There's an alien head on this map. And he looks at my gazetteer and he goes, those idiots, it didn't crash there, it crashed about right there. And he moved about an inch away. And so an inch away from that was about right there. So I went up there anyway because they don't own the road. I just didn't cross the fence lines, and I found enough of these Mexican blue oaks, grew them out, and there they are in my yard. So that's in Fort Collins, but you can get all kinds of neat things by that. So to learn some more, these oaks were at the USDA Horticulture Station in Cheyenne. They're planted from seed collected in the Black Hills in 1950. And I brought some today. So here they are right here.
You gonna talk about them? You want me to turn the light on?
Yes, please. So I guess these are going to be door prizes. And what I wanted to point out to you is that why are the ones from the Black Hills only 3 inches tall or 4 inches tall, and some of them are 6 inches tall, whereas the ones from just ones in the city of Fort Collins, which came from who knows where, why are they this big? It's because of this. Here's the acorn from the Black Hills. Here's the acorn from probably places like Missouri. So the first year of an acorn's life, inside this acorn is the cotyledon, which gives food. So the ones in the Black Hill the first year, they had a much smaller food supply than the ones from Missouri. But now these things are just rotten. They ate all the food. There's nothing left. So now they have roots that can get their nutrients from the soil and from the fertilizer that might be, the compost, whatever, rotting leaves. So the next year they'll do a lot better. But why are the ones in the Black Hills have tiny acorns? And why the ones in Missouri have big acorns? Well, here, I bet some of you probably know the answer. Is because the growing season is so much shorter. So the ones in Missouri, they're still growing until October, November. And then they drop but here, September is when they start to drop their leaves. So in order for them, if they had the genetics to make a big acorn, they never had the acorns. They never ripened properly. So they couldn't pass their genetics on to the next generation. But the ones who had the small acorns could pass their genetics on for the next generation for thousands of years. And so that's why the first year of the Wyoming bur oaks are much smaller, but they will make it. So you can see they're already big trees now in those pictures. I mean, that's a 70-year-old tree, but remember, they haven't had water for 40 years after they closed the station in 1974. She should get her choice, and I didn't tell you about
So
these.
we're going to talk about this other one first.
Then you'll probably take this one. So it's just like, when you get your first choice at Christmas, you take the big package versus the tiny package. Well, this is a choke cherry that was found in Helena, Montana. I'm going to talk a little bit about it later on, but since we're doing the door prize, it has red leaves. It's a choke cherry that doesn't sucker.
This is a sucker.
Yeah, it doesn't sucker. And so we have 16 of these, and this plant was given to me by an old timer in Helena, Montana. We're 40 below zero He had it for 35 years, told me it never suckered. I got it in Fort Collins, it never suckered since 1999. So that's almost been, another 24 years. So that's over 50 years of no suckering. And we made hundreds of thousands of these over the years, never suckered. We gave it to Plant Select, and Ross here is the director of Plant Select, and that's a cooperation between the Denver Botanic Gardens, Colorado State University, and the Rocky Mountain Green Industry. We have members that are from the state of Wyoming, a lot in Colorado, New Mexico, all over the Rockies and beyond. And this plant, last year, 2 years ago, was a rooted cutting. And it was this big. Last spring, we put it in this pot, in a bigger pot, and it started to grow. And if you see these little stubs, here's an even better example. Little stubs, we took the energy out of the stubs by just cutting them back so that just the terminal bud grew. So after we did that, this thing grew that much last year. Just in one year. So these were on their own roots. You plant them in the ground and give them water, protect them from the animals, like deer from rubbing on them or your cows from eating them. And put a big mulch ring around them and give them water and some fertilizer. They should do very well for you. Already 40 below zero hardy, and it's a native plant. So,
Big around too?
yep, they get big around. We have the one that I planted in 1999 that I got from cutting from Helena is now as a trunk this big around.
Wow.
So they're gonna, you guys probably all heard of the Canada Red. The Canada Red is likely it's one of its parents. We don't know what the other parent is because who was around 50 years ago to know? But the other parent made it so that it doesn't sucker. We think maybe it was the Mayday tree. That's our best guess because they're so closely related. And both of them lived in Helena, Montana. Both of them are 40 below zero hardy. So that's what we think. It's a Mayday times Canada Red. So, but it has, when you get it home and you start to grow, the new growth comes out green. So you say, wait a minute here. But then it changes midsummer to red, to purple. And by the end of the summer, every leaf is purple. But all of them start out to be green.
So what's its trade name now?
It's called Sucker Punch, the Sucker Punch chokecherry. And so it's a name that, like we knock out the suckers. So that, and we trademarked that name too. Surprisingly, it wasn't taken. Okay, so please, help.
We're gonna go ahead and go through everybody, try to get everybody one first. Then we're gonna put the tickets back in because some will get 2 trees, so.
So I do have a question on the ones that were collected in the Black Hills.
Uh-huh.
So is that the actually cross between 2 different kinds of oaks? Is that correct?
We think it is. We do, and so the next slides we're going to just talk about that. So we think that the reason why they were able to survive and not have the big fruit is that in the Black Hills still is what's called the gamble oak. And the gamble oak and the bur oak cross-pollinate each other. And so we think that the tree form are actually naturally occurring hybrids between the bur oak and the gamble oak. And so that's one of the reasons why they have smaller leaves and survive still to this day, whereas the big fruited ones just wouldn't be able to do it because the season's too short. Oh, so one thing to remember about the pots, you'll see they're unusual pots. They have holes on the side and everything. these are called root maker pots, so they make a nice fibrous root system, but they also make it more difficult to water. And so until you get them in the ground, I think the best way to water them is just to get a bucket of water and just dip them. Just submerge them completely until you don't see any more bubbles coming out, and then drip dry somewhere so that it doesn't, and kind of look to make sure that they don't dry out. You might have to do that a couple times a week or so. And if you store them outside, more than 2 times a week. Because in our nursery, we water them every day in the summertime. But I'm sure you'll probably have them in the ground or shift them into a bigger pot. If you're not ready to plant them, you can just put them in a bigger pot. Then you won't have to water them as much. But these are notoriously for drying out quickly. But they make really nice root systems. Okay, thank you. So that was the question that was asked, is if they're hybrids. And there's 2 known areas that university students in 1960 found them in Crook County, Wyoming, near the Devil's Tower. Here they are here. And the other one was down in Cottonwood Canyon from that first couple of slides I've showed you down in southeastern Colorado, where during the last ice age, that was a period called the Pleistocene, where even though when we think of ice age, we think of everything being covered with glaciers. Well, that wasn't the case in these areas. It was still had summers. They still had seeds would germinate. It was just cooler and wetter in the Rockies. And so the eastern oaks came in. The bur oak wasn't in Wyoming at the time. It wasn't in New Mexico and in Colorado. But they came in. They followed the rivers, came into the state, and they hybridized themselves with the Campbell oak, which is a true Rocky Mountain native that's been here for a long, long time. And when the ice age ended, it got warmer and drier. And so in the case of Crook County up in near here, they couldn't survive for 2 reasons: because it was too cold, too dry, and not enough growing season. But especially down in southeastern Colorado, which is historically the Dust Bowl, it was too dry for them. But the Campbell was able to survive on more natural precipitation, and they were able to pass that genetics, and they're still alive today. The Pleistocene was 25,000 years ago, so these have still survived 25,000 years, generation to generation to generation to generation, passing on their genetics. So the ones that you get in the Wyoming ones are what you're getting here for these. So there's another big form of it down in New Mexico, where it's called the Gila monster, and that's wonderful, giant, drought-tolerant tree that's going to be plant select soon. They've survived 3 times since 1970, 30 below zero, 12 inches of natural precipitation, and 7,000 foot elevation. So there's somebody from 7,000 foot. Yes, it was you. So, but the ones that she chose, which was she asked me if I wanted the bur or that one's much better, I think, for 7,000 up here, because that's New Mexico, 7,000 foot. So when you collect the acorns, don't be afraid to pick them green. And the secret is to look when you start seeing them on the tree that are starting to turn brown. At least if they started to turn brown, that means they're good to go collecting off the tree. Because once they fall on the ground, especially in the Rockies, the animals get them. And they're gone almost overnight. And so we pick them off the tree and protect them from excess drying, because acorns are a class of a seed that's called recalcitrant, which means that if they dry down too much, it kills them. So they actually depend on things like squirrels finding them and then scampering off and burying them and covering them up so that they have at least a fighting chance of not drying down too much, because they're protected in the soil, and if it does rain, the soil gets moist. Or for humans, we protect them and put them in Ziploc baggies and put them in the refrigerator, so when the moisture leaves the acorn, it drips onto the plastic and condenses and then drops back down. And western oaks sprout within days of collecting. And that's something that they've evolved to do, because if they germinate and go and fall on the ground and germinate, there's still a chance that it's going to rain. But if they didn't germinate, they would just dry. They would dry up and die. So that's really important, to protect them from excess drying. And so once we do that, once they start to germinate, we sow them right away in these pots. And we keep them in a mildly heated greenhouse, or you would do it in maybe your garage, or put them in a garden bed at home and mulch it with mulch to keep it from getting too cold. I just mentioned that. You can see these are starting to grow, and I want to show this close-up of this picture. See the holes right there? There's another hole there. That is weevils. There's a weevil that a big weevil will lay the eggs. They'll go into the tree, the acorn, and just eat it and kill it. So if you see the weevils, just throw that away, because it's already been ate. So it's just not worth saving. So always only keep the acorns that don't have weevils. We also use buckets. Buckets, you've heard the term stratification. So like bur oaks don't necessarily germinate in this fall, because they're Midwest and there's a lot more moisture there, so they can fall into the leaf litter and survive. So we put buckets that we've poked holes onto the bottom. And what stratification means, the first word strata means layer. Like the earth strata, the layers of the earth, or a strategy, a military layered plan. And so a layer of vermiculite, seed, vermiculite, seed, vermiculite, seed, vermiculite at the top. And we wet that vermiculite down and we put it into a root cellar. And the root cellar will prevent the seeds from drying down and getting too moist, too warm. And then in the spring, we look for signs of germination and plant them. Before we often put them in the buckets, we soak them overnight in water, just to make sure that they've gotten, if they've lost any of the natural moisture, they still get rehydrated. And then I mentioned earlier, where you'd grow double or triple your target number so you can throw away the runts. And then that way, when you're planting a row of them, you're only planting the Wilt Chamberlains and not the Pee Wee Hermans. And so that's what we do. Cleaning the pulp off is really important, because pulp often has chemicals in the pulp that inhibit germination. So just a French mill, where we depulp the choke cherries in this case, or by hand with American plum. And so that's another good one for Gillette, is the American plum. And the seed is often, or the the pulp is good, but the skin is bitter. So I often will just squeeze it into my mouth and then throw the skin away. Just eat the pulp or make it into jams and jellies. Preparing the seed for stratification, small lots, I would use cheesecloth and put them into Ziploc bags with a little bit of moisture in there. But usually I've gone away from small lots and just have bigger lots. I just use Ziploc bags. So this one was big tooth maples mixed in with some peat and perlite, but I've gone to vermiculite. After 90 days in the refrigerator, if many plants will start to germinate in the refrigerator, but not all plants do, but these big tooth maples do.
Scott,
Yes.
you have them in the Ziploc, are they completely sealed, or do you let a little bit of air get in there?
They're completely sealed, but once a month, I take everything out of the refrigerator and I open them up and I look for signs of germination, and I look for signs of mold, and I look for signs that are they wet enough. And then by opening them up once a month, that gives enough air. And they are a little bit, some gas exchange can just go through the plastic surprisingly. So the first thing I do, like if I have a set of seeds that need 90 days of cold stratification, I'll take all those and I time my germination to everything to germinate April 1st. So 90 days from April 1st is January. So you got 30 days to February, March to April. And so I soak all my 90-day germinations, which I've made a book out of. I've made a recipe book. And I'll soak them overnight in water. The next day, I dump all the water out. And then, if I've got 2 inches of choke cherries or whatever seed I have on the bottom, I put roughly 2 inches of vermiculite, dry vermiculite on top. And then the moisture the choke cherries are now imbibed with water. And the vermiculite's there just to absorb the extra water. Now shake them up. And so that's what it looks like afterwards. And then I put that in the refrigerator. Not the freezer. Don't ever put them in the freezer. But put them in the refrigerator. And that's my wife has made me get a garage refrigerator because she's tired of her vegetable crisper being homes for my seeds. And so it's going to look like it's not wet enough. And so how do you know if it's wet enough? Is the next day you look in the refrigerator, and if there's condensation on the inside of the bag, it's wet enough. And then a month later, when like the question you just asked, when I check my seeds, I'll look and see if it's still got condensation. If there isn't, that means that the seed has absorbed that moisture. And then I put more water in. It's usually maybe 20, 30 drops in that size 1 gallon Ziploc. It's not very much. And if you put too much, you can just put more dry vermiculite in there to absorb that. It always looks like, it doesn't look like it has enough water, then that's enough. As long as there's condensation on the inside of the bag. Certain seeds have chemical germination inhibitors that need to be leached away. Like the Indians used to take and put buckskin, and it wasn't for seed germination, but it was to leach out the chemicals that made the acorns bitter. So they'd leach it away. So some of those chemicals actually were inhibiting germination. So I had this idea is that every time you flush the toilet, it changes the water. And so I would hang them in the back of the toilet, not the front. And so every time you flush the toilet, it changed the water. And so, you know, when you have workers, you have to specify. Because you never know. So that after 6 days of doing that, all the chemicals that was preventing germination are gone, and they often will germinate really quickly. I still put them in the refrigerator and look for signs of germination, and sometimes it germinates right away on certain species that have that. Circle carpus is the mountain mahoganies. And I know in the bighorns there's some really nice mountain mahoganies that grow there. Sometimes the hard seed coat is used with sulfuric acid. I mentioned that with the thimbleberries, that raspberry. And so I used to just go to the Colorado State University chemistry department and buy big jugs of sulfuric acid. But after 9/11, they learned that that's an ingredient in bomb making, so you can't do that anymore. So I have to really look hard and find some CSU professor that's willing to go to the chemistry department's stockroom and buy me, because he's known me for 25 years. But you guys aren't probably going to be able to find that. So there's a better way that I'm only a couple things do I use concentrated sulfuric acid. I've gone to boiling water. So there we are. I've got boiling water. You don't empty the seed into the big pot and then boil them. You boil the water by itself, and you have the seed in these bags. Once the water starts to boil, you turn the heat off, and it instantly stops boiling. So it's below the boiling level. And I'd get a cup, like that coffee cup, I dip it into the boiling water and pour it over the seed until there's double. If there's this much seed, there's this much boiling water that now is cooled less than boiling, and store it overnight. The next day, I'll see often the seed will have imbibed water, because that hot water has caused little fissures in parts of the seed. Like there's a thing called the helium, and I'll show you what the helium. Helium is like your belly button. It's the point that was attached to the mother plant through the seed, and then gave the mother's nutrient to the seed. So here's what I'm talking is the helium, and it looks like an umbilical cord. That's the helium, the helium, the helium, the helium. So in this particular case, this is Kentucky coffee tree, and it's big seed. So instead of boiling the seed, because this is really thick seed, I take it to a grinding wheel. And away from the helium, on the opposite side of the umbilical cord called the helium, I grind a little bit away until the white endocarp is exposed. And there it is. Then I soak that just in regular water overnight. So here's what happens. This is, I'm talking about the umbilical cord here. So here it is. All these Kentucky coffee trees have the grinding on them. After one night of soaking, you can see where they've started to swell, and the outer seed coat's starting to break apart, because they now have swelled and they have grow power. Every one of those seeds now will become a tree, because now they have the ability to germinate. Because the only thing that was stopping the Kentucky coffee tree from growing was the hard seed coat. In nature, it might take 3 years just for freeze thaw, fungus, bacteria, animals gnawing on it for that to break that seed coat. But we can do that manually by that grinding wheel. Some seeds don't need stratification, and they germinate directly after you plant them. And so we just plant them in these strip rows, and they come, and I do that in April, just from, like tomatoes are like that. You don't have to do anything special with tomatoes. You can just plant the tomatoes, and they germinate with heat and moisture. A lot of plants do that. So we have a list of the plants that do that. Sometimes I plant it too thick. I don't make this mistake anymore. I put it way too thick and dampen off fungus got in there and rotted the trees, rotted the seeds. So don't plant them as thick as I did here. This is the same seed here where I only planted a couple per cell, where I just had extra seeds, so I just threw it all so thickly and it rotted. So that's a mistake. Don't sow your seeds thinly. Transplanting and aftercare. So once you transplanted them, these are young plants that we're ripping them away from and breaking some of the roots, and we're causing them to go into shock. And a lot of people will lose their transplants at that stage. So what we do is to prevent transplant shock, which increases the risk of death, we place the newly transplanted seedlings under intermittent mists. So every 15 minutes, 3 seconds of mist comes on. And so these seedlings, which are going into shock, get moisture and they kind of wake up again. And then they're going into shock again, and then more moisture comes. And after 3 days, they get past the transplant shock. So you can do that manually at home with squirt bottles. And you don't have to do it every 15 minutes. That's because this greenhouse is in full sun. You'll have it like on your kitchen countertop or wherever you're germinating wherever you transplanted your seedlings, and just kind of mist them. They're not going to be in full sun. So 3 times a day is usually enough. In the midsummer prune, because these are shrubs, we don't want just one thing to grow. We want to make them bushy, so we prune them at 3 inches tall in the middle of summer. Now, this next slide shows you 6 months later, those rabbit brush now have 6 or 7 branches, and they're a foot tall. So we prune them back down to 4 inches again in midsummer. So the next spring, you have a really nice bushy plant. Hardwood cuttings. This is the thing that most people will be able to take away right now and make free trees. It's the easiest thing to do, but the 3 species, genuses that do the best are, that's a willow called the peach leaf willow. Here's willows that grow along the creeks. That's called the coyote willow. And then the cottonwoods. Cottonwoods can be done from cuttings very easily. So these 3 cottonwoods were hit by a tractor when they were going by, so they were cold. So we're just making new trees out of those cottonwoods that are going to just be dug up and thrown to the side. So then we take them and cut them into bandsaw, since we do thousands of them, at 6 inches long. And then we take them and stick them. They're like 6 inches. We stick 2 inches into these cells, making sure that the buds are all facing up. You don't want to turn them upside down. The buds have to face up. Sometimes, like with grapes, and grapes, the next one we're going to talk about, it's hard to tell what's up on a grape. But there's a way, I'll show you. So we stick these in April, and 3 weeks later, they're like that. They've already grown, they've already got roots, they're ready to go. Now, this is an old slide because we don't do them in the greenhouse anymore. We just take them and put them in our field. We just stick them 6 inches in our field, and we do thousands of them. And we have these mounds, and we have drip tape along the top of the mound, so that if we have really a winter snowstorm or a lot of rain, the mounds, they don't drown. So they're on the very top, and when we water them, there's just drip tape, like, spaghetti tubes and that type of thing, with emitters. And they grow, and in 1 year, they're between 4 feet to 6 feet tall, just from a stick that you took from last season's growth. It's so easy. Grapes. This one is St. Teresa's seedless. Is one that our nursery introduced from Elmer Swenson's work. It's a seedless grape. This, our pH is 8, and look how healthy the leaves are. They're not chlorotic at all. And they ripen their fruit about September 1st, so they ripen their fruit early enough. Whereas Concord, the famous Concord, ripens at the end of September, so this one is a better one for allows the plant to store energy after you've harvested the fruit. So you take, this is where I used to live. This was my grape arbor, and I didn't grow grapes for the grapes, I grew them for wood to make new ones. So I would take these long canes, and they might grow 20 feet in 1 year, and I would take 2 nodes from each one. A node is a bud. 1 bud, 2 bud, cut. 1 bud, 2 bud, cut. 1 bud, 2 bud, cut. So I might be able to get 12 plants off of one big long cane that grew last year. So then I take those, so you look here, here's a bud, and then the other, and there's usually grapes that have long internodal spaces. The second bud is below ground. And that's important. So the bottom bud, you cut 1/4 inch below the bottom bud, and you stick that bottom bud below ground. Because the bud has some sort of magic, because that's where growing chemicals accumulate at that bud, and that's where roots come out. And so so these are just now starting to grow, and 2 weeks later, there they are. They're just growing, and you don't have to use any hormones at all on any of them. None on the cottonwoods, none on the willows, none on the grapes. You just stick them in the cells, keep them from real cold temperatures, give them water and light. That's all you have to do. But you collect all of them in the dormant season while they are still sleeping. And so with the grapes, I bundle them up with rubber bands and put them in a big bucket, this much sand. So it's like stratification again, but I use sand. Sand, grapes, sand, grapes. And I do about 4,000 grapes a year from these. That's why I grow them not for grapes, to make new plants just for the wood. And the same with the cottonwoods. I take those and I store them in sand. I make cuttings with the bandsaw, because there's a lot more buds on a cottonwood other than a grapes. Grape has 2. Cottonwoods might have, 6 or 7.
The cottonwood twigging in the fall?
I do that in like February or March. And then I bundle them up and put them in sand. And then, because I have a greenhouse, a lot of people don't have the greenhouse, I'll take them out in April. Where you might want to not do sand, just put them in your refrigerator, or go to a Craigslist and get an old beater refrigerator and put it in your garage, and just have that as your cottonwood storage or your seed storage thing. You can find those kind of things. Yes?
So could I go out and cut my grapes now if I didn't prune them back last year?
You sure could. Discard the tips. This much, because they're skinnier. Just use the ones closer to the, because if they might have grown, 10 or 20 feet, you can have a lot of them. So I was telling you, how do you tell the difference? So here is the bud, and right below the bud, you'll see a scar. It's called the leaf scar, and it kind of looks like a big smiley face. That's the leaf scar, and the leaf scar is always on the bottom. It's closest to the ground. So the bud is above, the leaf scar is below. So even if you tried to keep the polarity at right, and you dropped them on the ground and said, which way was this? You just look for that leaf scar, and that's the one that's going to be below. So that's how you tell top from bottom. So root cuttings is another easy way to do it. And a rule of thumb is if a plant suckers, it can be propagated by root cuttings. So like sumacs, you know, they can sucker and make a big giant colony. So this is native. I've seen it in the Black Hills here in Wyoming. It's west of Fort Collins and the Risk Canyon. It's got great fall color. Sometimes you don't even know it's there until you see the red fall color in the fall. So, there it is. And so you kind of make mental note and you can go back there. So I got my start from that patch. And so what I do, now I have a big patch in my yard. I come in with a shovel and I dig up a bunch because there's always too many because they sucker and make a big colony. So I've got great big pieces, but I like the small pieces because it's hard to stick that into a small pot. But if you just wanted more for your yard, you could come in and make 1, 2, 3, 4, and then follow my rules of keeping the polarity straight and just stick them where you wanted a new patch. And put the proximal end, and I'll explain what that is, above ground, exposed to light. So here. So I like the small pieces because I put them in 2-inch pots that are 4.5 inches deep. And I keep the polarity intact. And so the polarity means the proximal end is the one that's closest to the trunk. So here's the trunk and here's the roots. So if I make this cutting, the top is the proximal, the bottom is the distal end, which is further down, distant from the trunk. So it's hard to tell the difference if you drop them or screw them up. So keep them in order while you're doing it. So I just bundle them up with a rubber band until I'm done with all my processing. Then I stick them in these pots with the proximal end, you can see them exposed to light. And that light is important because the light is what causes it to send up a shoot. So they've already rooted, so you don't have to worry about getting roots on these. You have to worry about getting shoots. So the next slide shows you that they're starting to come up from the root piece. That's another no-brainer. You don't need any hormones or anything with anything. You can do aspens with it. You can do amylancers, serviceberries. You can do roosts. There's so many plants that raspberries. You can do raspberries that way. It's a really easy way to increase plants by root cuttings as long as they sucker in nature. And then there's my patch again. So, you know, that started out with just a few roots that I got up the Risk Canyon and I stuck them. And now I've got a giant patch and it follows my drip line. So I've got way too many of them. So that's when I just dig them up and make new ones. And I'm glad because it keeps them in bounds. Softwood cuttings. So this is our greenhouse complex. Those are cuttings that are taken from actively growing softwood cuttings that grow in the middle of summer. And it's a mist. You can see the walkway, it's all glistening because every 7 minutes, because it's middle of summer, it's 100 degrees outside sometimes, it layers down another layer of mist. So whenever they start to wilt, mist comes and then they perk up again. And it's only on during daylight hours. So I look at when the sunrise and sunset and it changes. So I adjust it. So it comes on in the morning, mist, dries down a little bit, mist. So it's about 6 seconds every 7 or 8 minutes until dusk, and then it's shut off for the night because there's no more sun and they don't dry up and they don't dry anymore. They're fine all night without it. If you left it on, the mist on all night, you'd kill your plants because you're overdoing it. It doesn't need it. So we go out into our blocks. That day was roses. Went into our rose blocks, and these are my crew, and this guy's doing, I think this is Hansa, this guy's doing Hope for Humanity, this guy's doing More Than Sunrise. So everybody has their own bucket, and we'll have a number. They'll say, we need 300 Hope for Humanity. So this guy's counting. 1, 2, 3. He gets to 50, puts them in the bucket, goes back. 1, 51, 52, 53. And you know what happens is that people forget their count. And then they'll say, did you get 300? Yeah. And he's guessing. And then we'll have to go back. Or he cut way too many. So that's why we started counting, because sometimes if you don't do that, you just spend a half an hour cutting things that you didn't need. And these plants are going to be for sale, and so we just made them that much smaller. So we take the cuttings. Here we are taking cuttings on 9 bark. We're doing the tip cuttings. So we're just cutting them back. They're nice, and we do it first thing in the morning from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. And from that, our whole crew goes out, takes them, and then we bring it back to the greenhouse. And from 10 o'clock to 4:30 with quitting time, we can finish processing them. And I'll show you how we do it. Yes?
So is it mostly just shrubs that you're doing the softwood cuttings on?
It's mostly soft shrubs, but it's for cultivars. It's for varieties. So if it's just if we just wanted to do roses, we'd probably just do seeds. If we wanted to just do choke cherries, we'd do seeds. But if we wanted to do Canada Red or Sucker Punch or Hope for Humanity or Gold Drop Potentilla, we would have to take cuttings off them so that they're the same plant, so they're clones of each other. So this one here is Mountain 9 bark, and it's hard to get enough seed on Mountain 9 bark, even though so we just take cuttings off of them. So we still, there's 2 ways to skin a cat, as they say. So we take those cuttings, bring them back, and then we hire a lot of high school kids or CSU students who need a summer job because we're taking them in the summertime. We have a crew of about 9 people, and we train them to cut a 1/4 inch below the node, make the cutting to be about 6 inches long, and after they cut below that node, then we strip that bottom leaf off. Then we take that. Oh, and that's the sucker punch. So they were taking the sucker punch right there. And like I say, it comes out, the new growth comes out green and then changes to purple. And the timing's often necessary. So if you wait until the sucker punch is purple, it's too late, it's too mature. So you have to take it really soft. So you can see that the tip is already starting to wilt a little bit, but we made sure we kept them wet along the way. And so there's the sucker punch when it was a lot smaller. Then we dip them in rooting hormone. And this rooting hormone is called IBA, indobutyric acid. And that was found to be a naturally occurring chemical found in willows originally. And so they've able to synthesize it in a laboratory. They don't have to cut down a bunch of willows like they used to make it. They just make it in a laboratory. And it comes in 10,000 parts per million concentrates. And we want it to be in 1,000 parts per million. Just remember, 1,000 is about all you need to know. So that means if you buy a 10,000 parts per million concentrate, it means it's 1 part of the concentrate and 10 parts water. So we diluted it down to that, and we stick the cut end into that for 7. We count to 7, and then it's absorbed enough of that rooting hormone, and that helps the plant root. And oftentimes, if you don't have that, certain plants need it. If you didn't put the IBA, that rooting hormone, they wouldn't root. So it's been something that has revolutionized propagation, that rooting hormone. And so just write down IBA and rooting hormone, and you'll see whatever, where you can buy it. It's all over the internet, different formulations. Then we stick them in these buckets with the part that we just dipped out of the water, with the tips in the water, because if we put them with the part that we just dipped in the water, then we dilute it. We wash it away. And then we always prevent it from wilting. Wilting's the death of softwood cuttings. So we get it in there and we just spray it down with the water. And then we stick them in cells where we use 3 parts perlite to 1 part peat. That's what we use as our rooting media. And so this cart fits 300 cuttings. Once we finish a flat, we put it on the cart, and we have a manual on and off mist, just because we never want them to dry out. And then we cart them off to the place where they go, and the mist comes on 6 seconds every 7 or 8 minutes. On cloudy days, we'll say 5 seconds every 12 minutes. And off at night. And then after about 3 weeks, look at this. Because we dipped that end in the rooting hormone and then tipped it upside down so the top was in the water and not the cut end, the rooting hormone then dripped up the side and it rooted all up and down the stems. It makes it easy. It makes it easy to be a propagator as long as you have a greenhouse, which costs about $30,000 or more, and ventilation fans and teams of high school kids and college kids to help you in the summertime and places to take cuttings. You can get plants to root. Some plants are harder to root, and that's why you don't see them in the nursery trade. But the plants that have proven themselves to be able to root, those are the ones you see. You see them all over the place. So sometimes we'll have only 50% taking, and so we'll lose 50% of them. So that just means that if it was $2 for that propagule that rooted, and you lost half of them, that means that propagule just became $4. That's how the pricing is. So you'll see that more expensive plants in the nursery is because they're harder to grow or harder to root or have, you know, any number of reasons why they're more expensive. But that's how it works. And then once you do that, once they've rooted, you wean them off the mist. And so usually I'll turn it down to like 2 seconds every 15 minutes. So they're not just ingloriating in mist, they're slowly weaned off of it, and then eventually it's off completely after about 5 days of being weaned. And then we just start watering them. And we water with fertilizer water, just like Miracle-Gro, at 100 parts per million nitrogen. And so these things have grow power. And then in our greenhouses, we just wait for winter. Because in the winter time, there's not much to do when you have a greenhouse full of plants that are sleeping. So here we are in the fall. It's starting to have fall colors starting to show up. And I'm already coming in 2 hours later in the day because there's nothing else to do. It's just like farmers. Farmers like the winter time. Then they can work on their tractors and not have to worry about everything else. That's our greenhouses. And then we wait for spring. We put them in bigger pots the following spring and start filling the greenhouses up again. So the benefit as master gardeners means you love plants. And with learning how to propagate plants, you can create the most magnificent gardens. You start to meet plant nerds like the Master Gardeners that have made this program available. Ross Wrigley, Scott Skogerboe, you're in our network and you say, what you got? Hey, if you go into the Bighorns and collect me some of that mountain mahogany, I'll give you some of my pets. We call them pets. And then this is what your yard has the potential to be. That's my front yard.
Wow.
And that's one giant, that's where I used to live, so it's not my yard anymore. But that's just my cactus garden, and where I never watered it. And I could tell you a funny story. The guy who was scouting out people to be in Sunset Magazine drove by my house. And he wanted me to be in Sunset Magazine. I said, not yet, there's too many weeds. So my wife and I, we went out there and just pulled weeds for a long time. And then he came by and he decided, oh no, you don't have enough hardscape. You don't have a beautiful patio with where you know, that's what Sunset's more about. But I was kind of grateful because I finally had an excuse to weed. So thank you very much.
Can I ask a question? Have you written a book? You should write a book if you haven't written a book.
People tell me that, and I always tell them, well, you know, I can't wait till I retire so I can finish my book. And they say, when did you start writing? I said, writing it? I'm talking about reading it. But you're right, I should write a book, and I've always meant to. There's a couple of books that I've thought that I could write, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it.
And all your secrets will be exposed for the rest of us.
No, and it's exactly how it should be. Imagine if the Egyptians had written down how they built the pyramids. You know, and those yeah, we live in pyramidal houses. So, yes, thank you. Any more questions? All right, thank you for everything.
Mary, do you want me to come across the first?
Sure, if you want me to.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
I was asked to, I came along with Scott and I traveled together, and I know it's been running a little late, I think, but I'm the director of Plant Select. I don't know how many people know Plant Select, but it's a program. He mentioned CSU and things like that, but Wyoming is tied a lot to Plant Select because of Scott, actually, and we have a lot of plants that came into the program from the Cheyenne High Plains Arboretum is what they call it now. But at any rate, I invite you to go to the plantselect.org website. And these brochures are over here. I want you to pick up one. We have 6. We introduce anywhere from 5 to 8 plants a year, new plants into the nursery trade. And some of them are straight natives and other ones are cultivars. And this year we're promoting 6 new ones, and 3 of those you can grow here in Gillette. And some of those are shrubs. And you can probably get those if you go to the Plant Select website. You can click on where to buy, and you'll see that there are places here in Wyoming that sell these plants. If you go to Casper, I don't know, we drove by the Buffalo Gardens. Do they still come out? They do? Is it still the same owners, DeSalva? Or?
Yeah.
Is this still the same owner? Man, that's amazing. Okay, so at any
Trying to
rate,
sell it 4 times.
yeah, 4 up to 4 now, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I heard that there's other people that come in to sell, like pop-ups and things like that, and I know one of them, I think, is Landon's or Gallus, right? Gallus Greenhouse, maybe? Landon's. Well, they are also a licensed, or they're a Plant Select retail member. And so they can get a lot of those plants and then get them out here. So like, there's one Carragena microphylla tidy, which is on here. It's a shrub. It's that yellow flowering pea shrub. That's a great plant. It'd be perfect out here. This other one, the totem silver buffalo berry, would be a fantastic one out here. And you know, it's weird, but logistics seem to be one of the holdups to getting up new plants. And I know that Lowe's or whoever else is here, Home Depot, they always buy these plants, and this group is probably the only ones that know that most of those, their buyer is stationed somewhere out east, right? And they go, well, that's a region. We can just order from there and then have them ship it at the wrong time. So, you know, those are fun plants to kill. But if you want good plants and save your money, you can shop, you know, some of the local ones. But I'm available for questions. If you have any, just come up and visit with me. You can find me on the internet, director@plantselect.org. But I love coming up to Gillette, by the way, so it's fun to come with Scott. So you guys have a hard growing season. All right.
Thank you.